This is Short Stories, a production of the Language Center at the National Taichung University of Science and Technology. I have prepared yet another Grimm Brothers tale for you. This one is called The Singing Bone, and it's a story about fratricide. Stories about a man who betrays and kills his brother are quite common in Western storytelling tradition. You could say that the first such story was that of Cain and Abel in the Bible. But it's a theme that gets repeated again and again, even in non-Christian sources. The story of Romulus and Remus is another famous example. Interestingly, neither Cain nor Romulus is executed for his crime. Vocabulary. Beset. Beset. This city is beset by violent crime. Heir. Heir. Charles is the heir to the throne. Covet. Covet. He coveted his neighbor's wealth. Slay. Slay. The knight slew the horrible dragon. Skewer. Skewer. I cooked the meat on a skewer. Chicken out. Chicken out. Frank said he was going to jump into the pool from the highest platform, but he chickened out. By the skin of one's teeth. By the skin of one's teeth. He escaped the prison camp by the skin of his teeth. Whittle. Whittle. She whittled a piece of wood into a figure of a cat. The story. There once was a kingdom that was beset by a terrible beast. It was a massive wild boar with tusks like daggers and bristly hair like needles. This monstrous mammal terrorized the local farmers. It gored livestock, trampled crops, and killed anyone who dared to hunt it. The community demanded that the king do something, but he was old and not up to the task. So he decided to offer a reward to anyone who was brave enough to slay the beast. If anyone can kill this horrible animal, announced the king at a town meeting, I will make him my heir. The king waited for some volunteers to step forward. After an uncomfortably long wait, 2 men finally threw their hats into the ring. These 2 men were brothers. The older brother was named Carl. He was very proud and deceitful. He was more than happy to volunteer because he coveted the opportunity to become king. The younger brother, Abe, on the other hand, was noble and honest. He volunteered because he genuinely cared about the community. After swearing oaths to the king, the 2 brothers set out to kill the beast, which lived in a thick forest in the northern part of the kingdom. Let's split up, suggested Carl. You approach from the east, while I approach from the west. We'll improve our odds of flushing out the monster from its hiding place. Abe, being a very trusting fellow, took his brother's advice. He entered the forest on the eastern side, armed only with a slingshot. Carl headed to the western end, armed with his trusty pitchfork. Abe stalked through the dark forest for hours, but never caught sight of the beast. Just when he was starting to feel despair, he was approached by a dwarf. "Greetings," said the cheerful dwarf. "Who are you?" asked Abe cautiously. The dwarf stepped closer and said, "Do not be afraid, for I was sent to help you." Abe was confused. "How can a little guy like you help me?" The dwarf reached into his thick beard and pulled out a magnificent spear. Abe took a step back and cried, "Be careful with that thing." The dwarf held out the weapon with upright palms and said, "This is for you. With this you will slay the wicked beast." Abe took the spear and marveled at its craftsmanship. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. The dwarf smiled and said, "Because you deserve it." Then the little man quickly disappeared by diving into the undergrowth. Armed with this new weapon, Abe boldly marched deeper into the foreboding forest. It didn't take him long to find the boar's tracks. He followed them to its lair, which was a large, deep hollow left by a tree that had fallen over. Abe could only see blackness when he looked inside, but something in him knew that the animal was there. He called out to it, "Suey, Suey, here, piggy, piggy." The beast began to stir, and Abe could hear its sharp hooves cracking sticks and crunching stone. It came rushing out of the hole like a rocket. Abe didn't even have time to think, so his arms acted without him. They held out the spear and jammed the butt into the ground, presenting the deadly end toward the charging boar. The animal, in its haste to kill, skewered itself on this mighty weapon, its heart being split in two. Abe wished to take the boar's corpse back to the king to claim his prize, but it was far too heavy for him to lift. So he left it where it lay and walked out the western end of the forest to look for his brother. Just outside the tree line, Abe found a cottage. He walked up to the door and knocked. As he did so, he noticed his brother's pitchfork resting against the wall. "What's this doing here?" he wondered. A young woman answered the door. "Is Carl here?" Abe asked. The woman looked over her shoulder and called, "Carl, your little brother is here." Carl came to the door and brusquely asked, "What do you want?" Abe told him about the boar, which Carl didn't believe at first. "How could a peewee like you kill a huge monster?" he asked. Abe responded with a question of his own. "Were you in here the whole time?" Carl crossed his arms and replied, "What, can't a guy stop by his girlfriend's place?" Now Carl was too proud to admit it, but he had chickened out when he saw how creepy and dark the forest was. He stopped by this cottage to drink beer until he felt brave enough to enter the woods. Eventually, Abe convinced Carl to come with him into the forest. He showed him the boar's body, and the two brothers dragged it back to the cottage, where the woman prepared a cart for them. The brothers loaded the animal onto the cart and began their journey home. As the cart bumped down the lonely road, Carl's mind burned with jealous thoughts. "Why does Abe get to be king? I'm the older brother. It should be me." These thoughts led Carl to a terrible conclusion. He was going to kill his brother and claim the credit for himself. Carl stopped the cart at a bridge and said, "Let's give the horse a break. It must be thirsty." Abe unhitched the horse and led it down to the water. Carl approached with his pitchfork and said, "You did a good job today, brother." Abe said, "Thanks, but I couldn't have retrieved the boar without you. I'm grateful for your help." Carl smiled and said, "No, brother, it is I who should be thanking you for helping me become king." Before Abe could reply, Carl ran him through with his pitchfork. Abe died instantly. After burying his brother's body under the foot of the bridge, Carl hitched the horse to the cart and continued the journey alone. The king believed Carl's story. "I tried to save my brother," lied Carl, "but I was too late. Fortunately, I managed to kill the beast by the skin of my teeth." The king formally declared Carl to be his heir and started grooming him for the throne. "I'm finally in my rightful place," thought Carl. An entire year passed and no one knew what had really happened to Abe. That is, until a young shepherd stumbled upon a grim surprise. Next to the bridge where Abe was murdered, the shepherd watered his flock. The sheep trampled the soft soil in their haste to get a drink. In doing so, they unearthed a pale bone. "What's this?" said the shepherd to himself. He picked it up to examine it. It was perfectly white and clean. "This will make a good flute," declared the young man as he pulled out his knife. He proceeded to whittle several holes into the bone and hollow out its core. Once finished, he decided to test it out, but to his surprise, it did not sound at all like a flute. It sounded like a person's voice. The shepherd dropped the bone out of fear, being too afraid to touch it. After several minutes, however, his curiosity overcame his fear, and he tried to play the flute once again. This is what it sang. "Thou hast blown upon my bone, long have I waited alone. My brother he cut me down, so he could wear a gold crown." The shepherd was utterly amazed at this magic bone. He took it back to the village and played it for all his friends and relatives. Word spread, and soon the king heard about the singing bone. He summoned the shepherd to the palace and said, "Play me a song, young man." The shepherd replied, "It only plays the one song, your highness." The king insisted that he play it anyway. Carl eyed the shepherd curiously as he lifted the flute to his lips. As the song played, Carl's eyes changed from curious to terrified. "Shut up!" he shouted. But the king asked the shepherd to continue. By the end of the song, the king understood completely. He eyed Carl and said, "What really happened to your brother?" Carl grew angry and yelled, "It's just a stupid shepherd boy playing a trick on us. Guard, take him away." But the king intervened and asked the shepherd where he found the bone. "By the old bridge, your highness," he answered. The king did not waste any time. He sent men to the bridge to investigate. It did not take them long to uncover the bones of Abe. The king disowned Carl and banished him from the kingdom. "But why, my lord?" pleaded Carl. "Because you deserve it," growled the king, and from that day onward, Carl was forced to wander the wilderness, bearing the mark of a traitor. The questions. Number 1. What beast was terrorizing the kingdom? A. A wild boar. B. A wild stallion. C. A dragon. D. An ogre. The answer is A. A wild boar. Question 2. Who helped Abe kill the beast? A. Carl. B. The king. C. A girl. D. A dwarf. The answer is D. A dwarf, because the dwarf gave Abe a spear. Question 3. How did the king find out about Carl's crime? A. He heard about it from the shepherd. B. He heard about it from a bone flute. C. He heard about it from Carl. D. He saw the truth in a dream. The answer is B. He heard about it from a bone flute. Question 4. What was Carl's punishment? A. He was executed. B. He was kicked out of the kingdom. C. He was forced to pay a fine. D. He was sent to jail. The answer is B. He was kicked out of the kingdom.